What's going on, everyone? It's Moose here with Airguns of Michigan, and we have another Maverick video. Today we're going to talk a little bit more about tuning, and these kind of tuning things kind of went a little backwards. I've already put out a video on adjusting the regulators, but today we're going to talk hammer spring and how we do that and why we want to do it and how I like to do it. So first things first, I'm going to go ahead and take off my scope here. I do like the thumb screw mounts just because it makes it nice and easy to remove my optics when I'm going to do stuff like this. And then we're going to go ahead and grab our this is the tipped-in range vise, but I find that I have a lot of times, honestly, I use this thing more than I use my big tipped-in behind me just because it's so convenient. So first thing we have to do is we have to remove these two screws that hold this stock to the gun. The first one is a 3mm, and we're just gonna go ahead and back it out. It's just a little short, little stubby thing. There you go, you can see it. Place it into our vise. And the next one I think is a 2.5, and it is. And this is a longer screw, so it's gonna be really hard to mix them up because, I mean, you can see a difference. That's a big long screw. So we're gonna go ahead and set that in there, and then we're gonna go ahead and just slide the stock right off the gun. It's really that simple. Set it down back there, and then for this, let's see. Yeah, I'm gonna leave it like this. No, I'm not. I'm gonna flip it over. So what we want to do with this power wheel is when we're tuning our gun, let's talk about that for a minute, because there's gonna come a few things into play. If you know, for example, that you're only going to shoot this gun with one type of projectile, whether it's a pellet or a slug, and you have no intentions of changing grain weight of the pellet or the slug, then this is really kind of straightforward. You're going to turn your hammer wheel to setting number 7, and that's what you're going to adjust everything from. However, for me, I wanted to shoot slugs at power wheel setting number 7, and then I wanted to shoot pellets, a lighter pellet at a lower hammer spring setting, right? So what I did and how I tuned my gun is I tuned it starting at hammer spring setting number 7, and I adjusted my hammer internally accordingly to what FX, including Ernest Rowe, claims is the optimal length of hammer. We'll get into that to shoot this gun safely. I will say this, that while most people claim 6mm out is as far as you can go, I believe that I've achieved further out than that. To be honest, once I started doing my fine tuning, at this point, I don't even know what my hammer spring length is at inside, or my hammer adjustment is. So let's go ahead, and the first thing that we're going to want to do, and you need to be careful when you're doing this as well. What I generally do is I turn my wheel until the adjust, because there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then there's an adjustment slot on the bottom where you can actually take a 1.5mm Allen and turn your hammer spring while it's still in the gun. But to start out, what I wanted to make sure was that, and this is a 2.5mm wrench. We're just going to go ahead and crack this loose. Now, what I like to do is I like to hold on to my hammer spring as I'm loosening this nut. And the reason is because there's a little ball bearing on the inside of this and a little spring. And we'll show you guys that once I get this out, exactly what it looks like. All right, so that's loose. I'm going to set that right in front of me. And then I'm going to slowly allow this thing to pop out. And there you go. You can see my little ball bearing is right there on my power wheel. You're going to want to set that down and out of the way so that nothing happens to that little ball bearing. Now the spring itself, I'm going to go ahead and just leave it in there because it's not that big of a deal. And then I'm just going to pull out my hammer. And there you go. That's it. It just comes right out of the end. There's the end there, and it just slides in. It only goes in one way with that little screw. It's got a little opening there. It just kind of slides right in there, all right? So we're going to pull that out, and then what we're going to do is we're going to take our little micrometer here, and let me see here. Set that to 0, and we're going to take a measurement. And mine is actually at 5.98, so just at 6 mil. It's perfect. You want to set this little screw that sticks out here on this end to be about 6 mil. Okay, and the way you do that is with a 1.5 mil wrench, and you can turn it left or right. Obviously, turning it clockwise is going to turn it in, shortening it, which is going to give you less hammer. Or you can turn it out, and it'll give you more hammer, okay? So that's where you want to be. You want to be at that 6 mil. At least that's what I found. So what that means for me is the way that I have my 22 caliber FX sniper set up is I have my first rag, or my high rag, set at about 105 to 110 bar. These gauges are a little difficult to figure out by just looking at them because they're not digital and they're not very well incrementally marked. And then my low rag is right at about 75 to 80. So my high rag is about 25 to 30 higher than my low rag. Hammer spring adjusted to 6 mil. And what that equates to is that when I want to shoot, let's say like an FX hybrid, right? Slug. Or, and those are what, 20, I can't remember how many grains they are. But, or even like a heavier pellet, a heavier 22 caliber pellet. When they're into those 22, 23, 24 grain weights, at hammer spring 7, I'm shooting in the mid 9s. When I drop down to my JSB 18.13s, which I'm very partial to shooting, I turn my hammer spring all the way down to setting number 3, and I'm getting that 880 to 905. So it works out perfect for me. What you decide to do is up to you. You tune your gun for yourself. But I found that the harmonics in this gun shoot great at those settings. I personally have my 18.13s as well as my slugs and heavier pellets at different hammer adjustment positions. So generally I shoot, like I said, hammer spring setting number 3 and hammer spring setting number 7. I don't usually go anywhere else besides that. Now, when you're putting this back together, this is where it gets a little tricky and people are kind of like, man, I don't know what the heck is going on. You'll see that there is a little hole. Let me go ahead and demonstrate it to you. You'll see that there is a little hole right next to the spring here, right? This is our spring where our ball bearing goes in. There's a little hole right next to it. That is where you're going to drop your screw that comes from the wheel itself. Keeping in mind also that you want wherever you took yours off at to be facing in the same direction. So for me, I took mine off at the adjust mark. So I'm going to turn this in. I'm going to turn this in while my hammer wheel is in the adjust position. I broke my little ball head off the tip of this thing a few weeks ago, and ever since then it doesn't want to Stay locked in. You do not need to reef this down. Just simply a little bounce, a little extra weight. And then the next thing you want to do is just make sure that your wheel rotates perfectly all the way around. And I'm going to return mine back to 3. Remember also that you never want to adjust this if the gun is cocked. If it is cocked, you want to decock it. So if it's cocked, you can simply, well, you can remove the safety first, and then just press this, press your trigger, and slowly release your cocking lever. And then putting it back together is the same way. Now, one thing I do want to talk about while we're on this topic, because generally when people have their guns apart and they see that their trigger mechanism is here, they want to start adjusting their trigger. It's your gun. Figure out which trigger works best for you. However, keep in mind, and I had this happen on mine, okay? I adjusted my hammer to a position that I liked, where my trigger pull gauge was telling me I'm like right at like 1.2 pounds, and that's good for me. I didn't need anything lighter. What happens though is that the way that the safety works on these guns is there's a little, you can see that little ball head there, the Allen head, that switches underneath the back of the trigger, right, to keep it from firing. Well, what happens is if you adjust this out of position, sometimes what happens is this little firing anti-fire block here, this part of your safety, is too long, and it will hit the back of your trigger. So just make sure if you're going to adjust your trigger that when you put your gun on safe, that little screw head slides underneath the sear block, okay, this trigger block. Otherwise, you'll find out, just like I did, that you no longer have a safety on your gun. And yes, I did find out, and no, it was not fun, because I thought for sure that I had my gun on safety, and it turns out I did not. So putting the stock back on, one thing I have found with the Maverick is that it's kind of tight in the back. You almost have to kind of force it down just a little, not a lot. You don't have to beat your gun up, but to get it to go back on, you kind of have to exert a little bit of force, and you'll see when you go to do yours that there you go, and and just those little tricks, right? So you'll find out that when you do yours as well, that it takes a little bit of finesse. So just keep that in mind when you're putting yours back on. Don't get frustrated. Take your time, lead it from the back of the gun, and then lay it forward, and it'll absolutely 100% go back together. So there we go with that. We got our gun sitting back up here. We can grab our optic again now, and set that back on there. Go ahead and tighten up our scope mounts. And like I said, I have a tendency, I take my scope on and off a lot. It does a really good job of holding zero with these, I think these are UTG mounts. Or some, no, those are the Monstrum cantilevers. That's what those are. And I have really good luck with them. They hold on really well. So there you have it. That's just kind of a quick rundown of like how to set your hammer, your hammer spring, to what it should be at for tuning. So now, keeping in mind that, like I said, I put up my other video on the on adjusting the regulators. If you plan on doing what I did and you want to be able to shoot those heavier slugs, adjust your gun at max on the 7. Get to that speed that you're looking for, especially if you're shooting slugs. You're probably going to want to be in the mid 9s, or maybe even high 9s. But then keep in mind that that's the reason that we tune on 7, is so that way we can drop down to hammer spring 3 like I'm on here, and now I can go back to shooting the JSB 18.13s, or if you're shooting 25 cal, you can shoot those, you know, lighter pellets without having to retune your entire gun. You know, I still get very good consistency whether I'm on 7 or 3, just depending upon the weight of the pellet or the slug. All right, so with that being said, hey, I'm Moose. Thanks for tuning in. I appreciate you guys being here. This is Airguns of Michigan, and if you guys have any more questions, feel free to drop a comment down below, and I'll do my best to answer everything I can. All right, until next time, take care.